Hi, welcome to Jewish Journeys. The week is long and hard. 5, maybe 6 days of non-stop work. But then one day comes along and gives us a glimpse into the world to come, a glimpse back to the Garden of Eden. That day is called Shabbat, and it's called Kadosh, a holy day, because on this day we get to stop and appreciate what God has done and not worry about what we didn't get done and still have to do. Shabbat traditionally begins on Friday evenings, and there are wonderful symbols and rituals and traditions that we share together as a community and as a family to make Shabbat on Friday nights. So in this video, I'm going to show you, with some help from some friends, how you can make Shabbat evening special. We'll be doing all of the traditions, including the candle lighting, blessing our children, washing our hands, making motzi, and then saying Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals. Any or all of these traditions make Shabbat evening a special time for you and your family. So why don't we get started by lighting our candles. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat traditionally begins 18 minutes before sundown. We welcome Shabbat with the lighting of candles. Traditionally, 2 candles are lit, one for each of the commandments regarding Shabbat in the Torah. Observe and remember. In some families, 1 candle is lit for every child in that family. Traditionally, the woman of the house is responsible for lighting candles, but anybody can fulfill this special mitzvah.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lechalik ner shel Shabbat.
After ushering in Shabbat with the lighting of the candles, it's customary to bless our children. These aren't my children, but they'll stand in for my children for this video. We start with our sons or our daughters, but there's a different opening line for each. For our sons we say, Yesimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim v'chimnasheh. May God make you like Ephraim and Menashe. For our daughters we say, Yisimech Elohim kesara Rivka Rachel v'Leah. May God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And for all of our children we continue, Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God bless you and keep you. May Adonai shine God's light upon you. May God turn God's spirit toward you and show you graciousness and give you peace. We sanctify the Sabbath by saying Kiddush or Kiddush over a glass of wine or grape juice. Shall we? Vayhir vayivoker yom hashishi, vayechulu hashamayim v'haaretz, v'chol tzivam, vayechal Elohim bayom hashvi melachto asher asa, vayishbot bayom hashvi mikom melachto asher asa, vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i vayikadesh oto, kivo Shabbat mikom melachto asher bara Elohim lasot. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Peri Hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratza banu, v'shabbat kadsho b'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit, ki hu yom techila lemikra kodesh, zecher letziat Mitzrayim, ki vanu v'charta v'otanu kidashta mikol hamim, v'shabbat kadshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat Amen. And because we're all royalty on Shabbat, it's traditional to sit down before you drink. The Shabbat table is called a shulchan, and it reminds us of the table, the altar, that was in the temple and in the tabernacle in the biblical days. Because this reminds us of that altar, of that special table, we do a lot of recreating at our Shabbat meals. So for example, in a moment you'll see the chalot, the challahs on the table, but before we can uncover them, we first have to wash our hands. Because whenever sacrifices were made in the temple, it always started with the washing of hands. There are other interpretations as to why we wash our hands as well. Max was just telling us one before.
Another interpretation why you wash is to clean off all the impurities from the previous week and renew your hands.
You don't want to bring any of those impurities into Shabbat.
Yeah.
You want to be able to start new. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to wash our hands. After we wash our hands, we'll all say the bracha together. The blessing is actually not over the washing. The blessing is actually over lifting our hands up. And so some people have the custom after you wash, when you're drying your hands, to lift them up a little bit. So we'll start with our washing. Rebecca, will you start for us?
Yes, I will.
2 times. You can put it right there on the table if you'd like, Emma. And you're going to wash a little water over each hand 2 times. Why don't you go ahead and start for us? And we can pass it around the table while you're drying your hands off. Now, one thing that's important is that just like with Kiddush, we don't speak in between doing the action and saying the blessing. There are also different traditions as to how many times you pour over each hand. Some people do 3, some people do 1, and then the other hand, then 1, and then the other hand. If you're wearing rings, one thing to remember is that you always want to take your rings off, because you want the water to try and touch every part of your hand. And after you wash, we'll say the blessing, which begins just like all other brachot. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, and then it ends, al netilat yadayim, which means thank you, God, for giving us the mitzvah of lifting up our hands and coming into Shabbat with clean hands and a clean heart. We've reached almost the time for our meal. We just finished washing our hands, which means now it's time for hamotzi. We have 2 challahs on Shabbat, 2 chalot, because it reminds us of how in the wilderness we weren't allowed to collect manna on Shabbat. Manna was the white flaky substance that God provided for us as we were wandering through the wilderness. And so on Fridays, God provided a double portion. And so we have a double portion at every meal of Shabbat to remind us of that miracle. So Emma's going to help lead us in hamotzi. By the way, we keep the challahs covered during Kiddush because we don't want them to feel badly that we're paying more attention to the wine, or attention first to the wine and only then to the challahs. You'll also notice after we say the bracha that Emma is going to put some salt on the table and then dip the challah into the salt before she gives a piece to everybody. That again reminds us of how this table is like the altar that was in the temple. Sacrifices were always salted before they were offered. And so since this bread is a little bit like our sacrifice on Shabbat, we remember the sacrifices of the temple by dipping in salt. So why don't we uncover the challahs, we'll lift them up, and we'll all say the blessing together. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, we give thanks to God for bread. Our voices rise in song together as our joyful prayer is said. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Now you shouldn't talk again between saying the blessing and having a piece, but I'll just let you know that it's the leader's job, and in this case Emma was our leader, to rip a piece of challah off for everybody at the table and make sure that they get a piece. and you're ready for your Shabbat meal. B'tei Avon. After the Shabbat meal, and everyone has had their fill, it's important to say thank you. And we do so with Birkat HaMazon, the Grace After Meals. There are lots of different books that have Grace After Meals in it. If you don't have a book, you can always just find your own words to thank God and to thank those who prepared the meal. Today we're going to do just the opening of the traditional Birkat HaMazon. We'll start with a paragraph that is done only on Shabbat, and then the opening call and response, followed by the first paragraph, which is probably the most well-known part of Birkat HaMazon. Ready? Shir Hamalot B'Shuv Adonai Et Shivat Zion Hayinu Kechomim Az Yemale Schok Pinu Ulshonenu Rina Az Yomru Vagoyim Higdil Adonai La'asoti Me'ele Higdil Adonai La'asoti Manu Hayinu Semechim Shuva Adonai Et Shivitenu Ka'afikim Ba'negev Hazorim Bedima Berina Yiksorum Haloch Yelech Uvacho No Se Meshech Hazara Bo Yavo Verina No Se Alumotav Chaverai Nivarech
Yehi
Shem Adonai Mevarach Me'atav Yad Olam Birshut Chaverai Nivarech Sha'achalnu Mishelo Baruch Sha'achalnu Mishelo Uvtuvo Chayinu Baruch Sha'achalnu Mishelo Uvtuvo Chayinu Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Hazan et HaOlam Kulo Bituvo Bechen Bechesed Uvrachamim Hu Noten Lechem Lechol Basar Ki Le'olam Chasto Uvtuvo Hagadol Tamid lo chasar lanu ve'al yachsar lanu mazon le'olam ba'ed ba'avur shemo hagadol ki hu elzan farnes lakol umetiv lakol umechin mazon lechol briotav asher bara Baruch Ata Adonai Hazan et HaKol. So there you have it. Almost a complete Shabbat celebration and meal. You know, Friday night can be a really special time for you and your family. You may want to include all of the blessings and all of the traditions that we've shared with you today, or maybe just a couple. One of the things that's most important, though, is that this is a time that you set aside to be with yourself, to be with your family, and to be with God, and to be thankful for all of these blessings in our lives. So until next time, Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom, Malachi Hashem.